Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, September 16th, 2025, and our friend Professor Marandi is back with us. Welcome back, Professor.
Hi, Nima. Thank you for inviting me. It's always an honor.
Professor, let's start with what has happened in Qatar. We talked about it before, and we had a summit in Doha. How did you find this summit, and how do you see the countries in the Middle East, in the West Asia, and the way that they're seeing the escalations on the part of Israelis, and what do they want to do with this sort of summit, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, I wanted to comment on your shirt because I find it a bit strange that you wear this shirt with me, but you're wearing a different shirt with Larry. And I feel that you're very biased. You're basically wearing your clothes as like Larry wears it, and I find it unacceptable. We have to have a show together with Larry and then see ultimately which shirt you choose. And that way we'll know which side you're on. But Nima, what is happened in Qatar, in my opinion, and at the UN Security Council before that, uh, is not important in the sense that there's going to be some sudden sea change in policy. Qatar does not have that sort of courage. The Emiratis, the Saudis, they're not going to move away from the American camp. Turkey will continue to allow uh, oil to flow to the Israeli regime from the Republic of Azerbaijan, Jordan. It will allow food to get in, food that goes from the Emirates to Saudi to the Jordanians, and circumventing the Red Sea. The Egyptians will continue to do business as usual. That is not going to change anything. But the language has become much more harsh. And that is reflective, in my opinion, of a reality that the world is changing. The people on the streets are becoming increasingly impatient. These governments, after all, they're not reflective of public opinion. In none of these countries are people happy with their policies, including in the Emirates and in Qatar or in Saudi Arabia or in Turkey or anywhere. But they have to be seen as remaining relevant. So it is hardening their stance. We see a hardening of the stance against the Israeli regime. The Algerian and the Pakistani governments, their position at the UN Security Council were also very tough. And the language used by some of these countries is becoming increasingly similar to the language of the resistance and the axis of resistance. Not that they're behaving in that way, and the right thing, of course, to do, in my opinion, is that they have to cut off all ties immediately, economic, political, and cultural, and just end the relationship permanently with the regime. But in any case, this shift, I think, if you look at it in the broader context of how the world is turning against the Israeli regime, the UN is finally, after almost 2 years, calling this a genocide. Remember, during the first few months, Western media and Western governments and Western elites were trying to justify the genocide by by lying about beheadings and the rape of women, and they still try to do that, but no one takes them seriously anymore. But back then, they bought time for the regime by doing that, and then we saw the world turning against the regime, and but still the West tried to be apologetic. They lied for it. Western media lied for it. Western intelligence agencies would lie for it. When they bombed the first hospital, uh, they pretended that it was the Palestinians who did it by mistake, or and but then they started bombing hospital after hospital, and they'd go into the hospitals and unplug the incubators and murder the infants. And so they couldn't defend them in that way anymore. They had to be apologetic in a different way. And then you had the South African complaint, where back then, despite Western pressure, they said that this could possibly be a genocide. It was a genocide back then, but Western pressure and European pressure and North American pressure and Australia and others, They just like the ICC, they forced them to do far less than they should have. But gradually, things continue to get worse for the Israeli regime. Its isolation grew, Western isolation grew, US isolation grew, and even in the United States, Charlie Kirk, the death of Charlie Kirk has become an issue, regardless of who murdered him. I have no idea. But it's coming out that his relationship with the Zionists was much more problematic than we thought. And many people are raising questions about the role of the Israeli regime in his assassination. Why? Because the Israeli regime is killing people across the region. They bomb even Qatar, which is the closest U.S. ally in the region by far. Qatar is completely submissive to the United States. It does nothing that it runs in conflict with U.S. interests. As we know now, or as we knew before, but as everyone knows now, Hamas is in Qatar because the United States wanted them to be there. The Israeli regime wanted them to be there. Qatar's wealth goes to the West. And even during um, the World Cup, when they were building hotels and stadiums and infrastructure and a metro which is now empty, uh, the those who carried out the construction companies and those who were developing all of these, they were linked to powerful people in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives, making huge billions of dollars just for the world during the World Cup, so that the Qataris could have U.S. protection. So they gave them a base. They pay for U.S. expenses in the base, in the Al Udeid base. They're constantly funding the West. All of their wealth, their wealth fund is more or less spent in ways in which please the United States, but yet they are still bombed. So when this happens, then people think, things like this. They see the death of Charlie Kirk as being suspicious in the sense that it could quite possibly, especially since the story provided by the FBI is so full of holes, that people are suspicious about the role of the Israeli regime. Now, I have no idea personally about what happened, but the point is that the regime has become despised across the world. And so this rhetoric or this language, the statements coming out of the summit the gathering of Arab leaders and Muslim leaders, this I think has to be. We have to. It is, if you look at it in a in a vacuum, it's disappointing. And I wasn't expecting anything more than this, by the way. But when you look at it within the context of this broader shift that's taking place across the world, this is not good news for the Israeli regime. In fact, as I said, I believe that a lot of the problems that now exist inside the United States, the divisions that we see, are linked to the Israeli regime, not just because of the 2 years of genocide and how the United States fully supports it. And the US Secretary of State goes to Palestine at a time when this new wave of terror is taking place in Gaza and fully supporting it. Not just that, but the fact that the regime is literally out of control, waging wars, getting the United States involved in their foreign wars, something that Charlie Kirk was had a problem with. He didn't want the U.S. to get involved in the conflict with Iran, between the war that the Israeli regime engaged with Iran. So we're seeing now that not only is the Israeli regime isolating the United States and the West internationally, but it's causing big problems at home for the Zionist elites in the United States and in the broader West. So I think this is just another brick in this wall. It is that's isolating the Israeli regime. And so while I'm sure that people are disappointed and they do see these countries as really betraying the Palestinian cause, the Turks should have ended, Erdogan should have ended the relationship. Morocco should have done the same. Egypt should have done the same. Jordan, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, they should have all just cut off ties, Bahrain. But the shift in language is notable. And I think it's reflective of the fact that these countries, these governments feel the need to uh, be more harsh. And when you put all that together with what's happening elsewhere and the UN General Assembly, this is not good news for the Israeli regime. And by the way, it also strengthens Iran. It strengthens Iran because it shows to Iranians and to the international community that doing a deal with the United States gets you nowhere. What deal could the Iranians possibly do with the Americans to prevent the United States or the Israeli regime from attacking Iran? Because without a doubt, what happened in Qatar was with U.S. coordination. There's zero doubt about that. It's impossible for the Israeli regime to do it without U.S. Not, without the U.S. being informed well beforehand and giving the green light. But so it tells basically Iranians that what sort of deal works. If the Qataris who are obedient to the United States have no protection and they actually have a huge U.S. base, then what about it? And then it also strengthens Hezbollah's position. Hezbollah now says, what deal can Lebanon do with the Israeli regime or the United States that would protect Lebanon without the arms of the resistance? So, what happened in Qatar hurt the Israeli regime in many ways.
I think what you've mentioned for the case of Charlie Kirk, Professor Marandi, you're talking about the Middle East is somehow changing, the mindset of the people, leader are somehow changing toward Israel. But Charlie Kirk was a very important example of what is happening in the United States. Those people who were supporting Israel before and who started questioning the position of Israel. What do they want to do? What is the main reason of this sort of behavior on the part of Israelis? Because he started not only about the behavior of Israel, he went to White House, he talked with Donald Trump about the attack on Iran. He said, "Why do we need to go to it? Why do we need to attack Iran? This continuous war in the Middle East doesn't benefit the United States." These are huge questions on the part of these people who are supporting, who are the main supporters of Donald Trump and MAGA movement. I think what's going on in the United States is somehow tremendous. It's huge what's going on there with these movements. Charlie Kirk was part of this movement. And how do you find that in the United States?
I think that this is a huge turning point because already, as we all know, popular opinion has been turning against the regime, despite the media, despite the political elite, despite the government in the United States and in Europe. Popular opinion has turned away from them, especially the youth, and their last strongholds were among the conservatives and the conservative part of the conservative youth. And he was representative of that. And he was a major force in US politics as a result. But and he was completely supportive of the genocide and the regime. And I mean, we cannot whitewash his past. I mean, his things that he said, and many of them were deeply disturbing. However, he was shifting for whatever reason, whether he saw the light, as they say, or whether it was because he saw that uh, his own audience was changing. Recall when Tucker Carlson spoke at that event that he hosted, and the youth were on his side. So he perhaps also felt that he could lose his influence and his relevance if he stuck with the genocidal regime, or perhaps uh, he did have a change in heart, or his eyes were increasingly open. I cannot speculate on what was going on in his heart at that time, but there was a change. And now we see the gray zone and others, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, speaking in recent hours about Max Blumenthal, speaking about uh, more information coming out. And again, because of all the holes in the FBI story, that makes it even more uh, questionable. But it's, I don't know what happened, but the point is that the Israeli regime has become so despised and has become such a problem that people find it understandable or acceptable or believable, despite the Western media, despite the politicians, despite, because you're not going to see any of this in the Western media. This is only online. This is only, the likes of Candace Owens and others who are pushing this. But despite that, it's believable. Why? Because of the nature of the regime. Because it's and then we see Trump about doing exactly the opposite of what he promised to do, engaging in more wars, continuing with the genocide. And it obviously wasn't very helpful for him to be seen sort of dancing in the stadium hours after Charlie Kirk died, or when a reporter asked him how he was coping, and then he spoke about the the ballroom that they're making. That indifference to Charlie Kirk, who apparently loved him, uh, all of this is harming uh, the, the, the Israeli regime. It's harming the Zionist uh, forces in the United States. So it's become an internal issue. It's not, and also what the Israeli regime did to Qatar has created fear for China and for other countries, because now it's clear that the Israeli regime has ambitions to control Western Asia. And this is the source of much of the world's energy, oil and gas as well. So it's not just Iran or Yemen or Hezbollah who are trying to stop the Israeli regime from continuing its genocide. This is about the entire West Asia, which is in the American camp. Even there, the Israeli regime feels it has to dominate, whether it's Turkey or whether it's Qatar or Saudi Arabia or the Emirates or anyone else. Now the Israelis are saying we will bomb whoever we want, whenever we want. Even though Trump, after the bombing, wrote that this will not happen again, immediately afterwards, Netanyahu said it will happen whenever we decide that it is to happen. So the United States, its credibility across the board is declining. It is seen as a full partner, as the world has, as the UN has called, finally, after almost 2 years, called this a genocide. We see the US Secretary of State going to Palestine and giving his absolute 100% support for the genocide in Gaza. That is hurting the United States interest. And then simultaneously, the regime is intensifying the slaughter, and then it's bombing new countries like Qatar. And then you have the issue of Charlie Kirk, his death, regardless of who was behind it. But this is creating a crisis of sorts at home, which is intensifying, in my opinion, the, the wave against the Israeli regime in the United States. So this is a global wave, but it is also something that is happening in the United States as well. It's delayed in the United States. It took place slower in the United States, but this was the last stronghold of the regime in the United States. Charlie Kirk and his and his organization was, I think, their last hope among the youth, and or at least conservative youth in the United States.
I think what has happened with the case of Charlie Kirk, he was going to universities, talking with students in order to shape their mindset, to communicate better with them, in order to convince them that the traditional conservative values are better than anything else. But he was shaped by the public opinion on Israel at the universities, because I don't know if you watched his latest interview with Ben Shapiro 48 hours before the assassination. He asked, these people at the universities are asking me, why are we supporting genocide? What is that? How do you call what's going on in Gaza? And these are, when he goes in that direction, it wasn't his position. He has learned it during these communications he had with the students. And uh, the change is happening because of the public opinion, Professor Marandi. And do you think that these people are gonna survive what's going on in the United States? I'm not talking about just Charlie Kirk. You've mentioned Tucker Carlson. These people who are against war, who don't want escalation in the Middle East or whenever that would be, because of the benefit of the United States, not because of the benefit of Gazans, because of the benefit of Iran or any other country, any other third party. What's your understanding on that?
Well, I think that, and I've been saying this for a very long time now. I think that this genocide is the end of the Israeli regime. I think the Israeli regime is, you know, among the walking dead. It may take a period of time, a few years uh, or so, but the regime has been utterly delegitimized in the eyes of the world. It was always illegitimate for those who were well informed and those who were pursuing uh, politics and who understood what was going on. Everyone, those people always knew it was not legitimate. It was an apartheid regime. It was a colonial regime. It carried out ethnic cleansing. It constantly carried out genocide. The Nakba was full of slaughter and rape and murder, something that the West likes to hide from us. So this has been going on for uh, over three quarters of a century. But this daily slaughter, where every once in a while you see a new form of barbarism that it's as if the Israelis are looking for new types of ways to outrage the world. It's sort of like they're trying to be creative in their barbarism. Just a clip I saw yesterday, which I tweeted, where a son and a mother were walking and they just bombed them and murdered them. It's just, or bringing down all these buildings that are packed with refugees. They just want to create further misery for the population, especially for the coming winter. It is going to become even more horrific than last winter. So, but so this all of this may seem to be success for the regime, but it's destroyed it, and the hostility towards the regime is becoming cemented. People have turned against it, but every day when they see more images on social media and in some countries, non-Western countries, on television or in the media, the mainstream media, their hatred for the regime becomes stronger and it becomes permanent. And now even the UN is admitting what they should have admitted a year and a half, 2 years ago. This is not new, but now it's just so bad that it can't be hidden. And the United States is being destroyed, not just, I mean, as a power, not just because of the internal divisions that we're now seeing and how people are turning against the regime in Washington, even as the Secretary of State goes to Israel and supports the slaughter of women and children and you know behaves as if this is all normal. Not only is it destroying the Zionists at home, but it's destroying the United States across the world. People sympathize with China against the United States because of Gaza. People sympathize with Russia in Ukraine partially because of Gaza. People sympathize with Iran. People are calling Iran the last hope. Even though the United States has been antagonizing Iran, the United States and its proxies have been antagonizing Iran for almost 5 decades now with great success through disinformation and misinformation and through twisting the truth over and through 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 all their policies that they've had towards Iran. But now people support Iran. Why? Because what's going on in Gaza is showing to the world that the United States is the problem across the world. So, and look at what happened in India. The Indian government voted for the two-state solution. By the way, Iran did not vote for it. Iran didn't even vote because Iran doesn't accept Israel. So if you add countries like Iran and I think Iraq and others, the number of countries that voted for the Palestinians and supported the Palestinians in the UN General Assembly would be even higher. Iran, I think, wasn't even they left the hall. They weren't there for the vote because of their policy. But the point is that India in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization condemned the Israeli regime. the Prime Minister of India condemned the Israeli regime for the airstrikes on Qatar, and the Indians supported the Palestinians in the UN General Assembly, or the pro-Palestinian uh, position that the UN General Assembly took. So this is despite the relationship that India has always had with Israel, especially under the Modi government. So the regime, and this is reflective of the United States as well. And the bombing of Qatar creates this global fear that that the Israelis want control of the of West Asia, and that brings about great instability for oil and gas. So all of these combined are pushing ahead, or increasing the pace of the decline of the West, uh, even more rapidly than before, even though this has been going on quite rapidly for the past 2 years. But I think, after the images of the starving babies, it, it, the pace increased a lot. And then the war against Iran, and then the war, like the airstrikes on Qatar, all of these are making it far worse, and increasing the pace of the decline of the West in the eyes of the world.
Isn't that amazing that when you're trying to talk with the United States, you're somehow closer to have a war with them instead of have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in Iran, the Iranian position has been vindicated. The government's position has been vindicated because the government says, what can we possibly do to protect our people from a potential US attack? The Qatari government is at the feet of the United States. When Trump went to Qatar, he was the king. And the same is true in Saudi Arabia, whose airspace was violated to bomb Qatar. So if they're not protected, even though there's an airbase, then any deal that Iran does with the United States is worthless. Or disarming Hezbollah is foolish, because any deal between the Lebanese government and the United States will not protect the country. What happened in Qatar ends the argument, ends the debate. The United States is completely unreliable, and not only will it not protect you, it will conspire against you. Because what happened in Qatar was with the US green light. There's no doubt about it. They had US Air Force flies over Syrian airspace. It flies over Iraqi airspace. US bases exist across the Persian Gulf region and in Iraq and in Turkey, and the US presence in Jordan is known to all. The US is everywhere in this region. How could the Israelis have all these planes flying over that territory without the risk of confrontation with the United States? It's impossible. They had to have coordination. They had to have US support.
What we've learned in the aftermath of the summit, that Iran and Egypt have decided to improve the relationship between the two countries. When you look at the larger picture and of what's going on in the Middle East, do you feel that we were talking about Europe and the way that Europe is trying to somehow deal with the issues of Ukraine. But how about the Middle East? When the reality would hit the Middle East that they need some sort of security agreement among these countries who are located in the region, and for the future of the region, for the prosperity of the region. They can negotiate better with the United States, they can negotiate better with China. It would benefit the region. Do you feel that would come with these sort of behaviors of Israelis that is fully supported by the Americans?
No, we're definitely heading towards darker days. We are heading towards more danger, and it could lead to very dramatic changes in the fortunes of people across the world. It's a very dangerous situation. Uh, it the United States is losing. The Israeli regime has lost, but it is very dangerous. But as you pointed out, even though the summit was a disappointment, in my opinion. As you know, it was not unexpected. I expected nothing better than what we saw. However, these even the changes in language can also be seen in other subtle changes, like the improved relationship between Iran and Egypt, like the changing of the discourse among countries that makes them more similar to the language of the resistance, the axis of resistance in particular. But also, even Jolani, who from the very beginning, the project was to bring him to power to destroy Syria. That was the US plan all along. Al Qaeda and ISIS, their behavior by nature destroys countries because it creates hatred and division and takfiri ideology. It's very similar to Zionism. The Wahhabi and the Salafis, their behavior towards others is very similar to the Zionists. So the point was to bring to put a, a a bomb into Damascus, a hand grenade, and to have everything explode. But even here, you see that he has to take a stance against the Israeli regime, even though until a few days ago he was saying, our enemies are just like yours, Iran and Hezbollah. They were seeking a deal. Even though the Israelis would bomb them, they never fired a single bullet at the regime. But even in that, he has to take a harder position. Everyone has to take a tougher position because people on the streets expect it. And that is another element. The world has turned again, just like in the United States, we see how people are changing. And our region is far worse for the regime. People are outraged, and every day that goes by just makes the anger and outrage greater. And so the harsher positions taken by these governments reflect that anger because they want to stay in power. These are not popular governments. They're not there by the consent of the people. Their policies do not coincide with the policies that people want to pursue. So they have to take this tougher position so that there's no unrest at home. So even in Syria, the regime has to change, but also other changes will take place because while these dictatorships, these pro-American dictatorships in the Persian Gulf region will continue to be in the U.S. camp, there's no doubt that they're in private conversations. They're saying to themselves, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to protect ourselves. There will be subtle, very subtle, they're still going to remain in the US camp, but there will be subtle shifts in how they deal with Iran, with Russia, with China, and with the West. There will be subtle changes if they are sane. So I think all of this is bad news for the regime. And this is because Netanyahu is not working in the interests of Zionism. He's working in the interests of Netanyahu. This genocide should have ended long ago. The genocide should have ended long ago. The expanded war against Lebanon, the war against Lebanon should not have happened. The war against Iran, none of this is good for the war against Iran was not good for the Israeli regime, but Netanyahu wants to remain in power. So he is dragging the regime down, and he's dragging the US down with it. He's dragging Europe down too. And this is just going to continue. So every day it's just like it's another brick on the wall that's isolating the regime. So they made the apartheid wall. Now they've helped create a wall surrounding the regime, which isolates it against the rest of the world.
When we look at the behavior of the Israeli government, many people are saying that they want to expand, but it seems their primary goal is somehow destroying the countries in the region the way that they're not capable of defending themselves. Look at what has happened in Syria. Yesterday, they were bombing Damascus, and they want the same thing in other countries. They want to bomb them. They no capability of defending themselves in these sort of attacks on the part of Israelis, and then expansion. And I don't know if the reality, if they were talking about these geopolitical issues when these sort of summits come to Doha, and what is the nature of the talks they're doing, Professor Marian? Many people like us, we don't know what's going on there. Do they really talk about geopolitical issues with Israel?
Well, and also, by the way, the Israelis bomb Lebanon regularly. Yesterday, they murdered one person in Nabatea. They bombed an apartment block, severely injuring women and children. So it's Syria, Lebanon, it's Yemen, it's the West Bank. The ethnic cleansing in the West Bank is moving forward at a very dramatic pace, and the U.S. government is fully behind it. And so all of this is happening, and of course Qatar as well. So all of this is happening. But I do think that even though uh, we all ex- would want, the world expects these leaders to cut off ties with the regime. I mean, imagine if Turkey had just stopped cooperating, if the Republic of Azerbaijan, Aliyev, ended his alliance with the regime, if Jordan and Egypt and the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Bahrainis and the Moroccans all did the same, the blow to the regime would be enormous. It would be enormous. It would make it far worse overnight. But we knew that this was not going to happen. Nevertheless, the discussions on the sidelines are not the discussions that are helpful to the regime. They hurt the regime. Countries do tilt away for the sake of self-preservation, because the regime in the United States doesn't take their interests into consideration. They're fearful of the United States. Erdogan is fearful if he does something that the United States doesn't like, they'll impose sanctions. The same is true in Saudi Arabia, or the same is true, or they could bomb the Emirates, or they can do what they did to Qatar. They could do it to Bahrain. They could do it to any of these countries, and these are weak regimes, family dictatorships that don't have popular support. It's not like in Iran when they bomb the country, then the people come to the streets. It's not like Lebanon where they bomb the country and the resistance holds them back, and they fail to take anything of anything substantial until after the ceasefire, and then the Lebanese government let them come in. It's not like in Yemen where the people rally behind Ansarullah and the Yemeni armed forces in the struggle. These regimes are weak, vulnerable, and unpopular, and in the American camp. But but still, they're worried. They're concerned. So, and that's what leads to improved ties for the example of Iran and Egypt, and it will definitely have a an impact on their relationships with China, Russia, and countries across the global south. It will definitely create greater interest in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or BRICS, anything that can provide them with a little bit more protection, even as they live in fear of the United States and they're stuck in the American camp. So none of this works. And as I said, it strengthens Iran because it shows that Iran's logic was always valid. It was correct. It strengthens Hezbollah. It strengthens the resistance. It strengthens the Palestinian people because they said, look, what they did in Qatar is completely uncalled for. So imagine, and so look at what. So and it makes people look again. Look again. Those who are still had their eyes closed somehow after 2 years. Look at Gaza in a different light. And then after what we saw in the summit, we see the intensification of the attack on Gaza and the outrageous airstrikes that we're now seeing. Sort of like a spit in the face to these Muslim leaders who do nothing for the Palestinian people. That can create instability. Many of these regimes, they take a stronger verbal stance because they're afraid about not only their own survival, uh, but also their image among the citizens of their countries. And so when the Israelis make things worse in Gaza immediately after those statements, it shows their ineffectiveness and it makes them look even weaker. And when they're seen as weak, that can make people feel more empowered in dealing with these governments, and that could lead to change. Remember, in 2000, when we had the Arab Spring, no one expected that. No one expected it. Today, the situation on the streets are far worse than what they were back then.
Donald Trump said that the United States will not let any more attacks on Qatar. But Netanyahu came out and said, we're going to attack again and again and again until we get the target. We get so it somehow shows how weak the United States is in dealing with Israel in the eyes of Arab states who are, somehow they did everything for the United States to stay in their countries in order to support them in terms of the security, how they, because they're not capable, they're buying. Many people would be somehow surprised that Saudi Arabia, the defense budget of Saudi Arabia is much more than what Iran has as a defense, but they're not capable of defending themselves. That's why the United States is there.
That's a great point. What about the trillions? I didn't say billions. The trillions of dollars that the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Qataris have spent on American weapons over the past couple of decades. The Israelis just fly right over their airspace and they can't do anything about it. And then the American bases that are all across the Persian Gulf region don't do anything about it. So all those resources went to waste. Trillions of dollars have gone to waste into the pockets of Western businessmen and Western governments for nothing, just to strengthen the United States, just to strengthen the Israeli regime, and to no effect. They flew right over Saudi Arabia. Not one plane or two planes, large numbers. Nothing. So, and the other point you made is so extraordinary. It wasn't as if Netanyahu said, no, we will strike like 6 months after or 3 months after Trump said it will not happen again. He said it literally hours later. It's a slap in the face to Trump. Yet this Trump, instead of responding to the Israelis and saying, no, I said this will not happen again and will not happen again, we see him dancing in the stadium hours after Charlie Kirk dies. And, when the reporter said, how are you holding up? He said, and he said, look at building a fantastic ballroom. And this is the state of the United States. He's reflective and this harms the United States. This weakens the United States even further. So it's all bad news. We've been saying this for 2 years now, that the Israeli regime and its genocide is destroying the collective West. It is destroying the empire. But it is just picking up speed as time goes by. It's like it's now going all downhill. It's like um, it's just picking up speed, especially after we saw the images of the starving kids and the starving Palestinians. We saw this rapid shift in the mood, especially in the West, and now it's what's happened with Iran and then what happened with Qatar. It's only it's just moving down more rapidly, but it's even impacting U.S. internal politics, as I said earlier. Now, Charlie Kirk, regardless of who carried it out, people are saying maybe the Israeli regime did it. Maybe it was because he was shifting. He was their last uh, major public figure uh, who could hold back the tide, at least among a segment of U.S. society. And he was shifting, we now know. And that created, because of the outrageous behavior of the Israeli regime and the U.S. government, people are saying maybe it was them. Probably it was them. It was definitely them, say some. Again, I have no idea. But the point is that it is weakening the foundations of the political regime in the United States. The last 2 years has been devastating, it's been extremely corrosive for the United States itself and Europe too. but the United States in particular. The Israeli regime is not only destroying humanity, but it's paradoxically it's destroying the empire.
Professor Mandy, before wrapping up this session, how do you feel about China today? Do you think that China, you compare China and their policy in the Middle East to the ones of the United States. What is the major difference between the two?
Well, the criticism that's directed towards China is that it's not doing enough. Compare that to the United States. The United States is carrying out a genocide. The US Secretary of State goes to Israel as it's intensifying these atrocities right after it attacks Qatar. That's outrageous behavior. So compare the criticisms. The United States is despised, and China, people are just, saying, can you do more? Please do more. Help stop this. That shows that the image of China is far. There was a poll recently carried out in Iran. The image of China is far higher than the image of any Western country, or it is substantially higher. Not the governments, China. Because people in Iran, some people may like the United States, Hollywood or universities, or traditionally that may have been the case. That is gradually changing too. So in Iran, people dislike the US government. In polls, it's always disliked immensely. But there is a segment of Iranian society that likes the United States as a country. China right now, brand China, is higher. It's ahead of all Western countries in Iran, according to the last poll. Why is that the case? It's because of Western behavior. So China is being empowered because of the behavior of the West. And by the way, the meeting between President Pezeshkian and President Xi, and also with other senior Chinese officials, went very well. Very important agreements were made, and the meeting between, of course, uh, the presidents of Russia and China has been widely discussed, went very well. But also the meeting between President Pezeshkian and President Putin also went very well. They had a 2-hour long meeting, but this summit was very successful, and the Chinese they feel threatened by the behavior of the United States, and the attack on Qatar has angered them too, because their energy supplies come from the Persian Gulf. As I said earlier, the Indian Prime Minister condemned it. Chinese are angry too. So that helps solidify ties with countries like Iran, because they countries feel they need Iran more than before in order to preserve the stability and security of the region.
I think the point you've raised is so important because China is much more dependent on the security of the region than the United States in terms of the energy. And I don't know if they would be interested in some sort of participation in what's going on in the Middle East even better than before. And do you feel that would come to their behavior? Because with the war in Ukraine, we saw China somehow, little by little, inching towards supporting Russia. They were supporting, they were not that much vocal about what was going on. How do you feel that about the Middle East?
The relationship between Iran and China is evolving very rapidly. The meeting between President Pezeshkian and President Xi in Beijing was, and with other senior officials in China were, I think, this was a turning point. And the Chinese, while they may not get involved so much directly, but their cooperation with Iran economically, militarily, politically is going to increase. So you see a parallel between the relationship between Iran and Russia, China and Russia, and China and Iran, and of course Iran, Russia, and Iran and China. Uh, this is thanks to U.S. policies, thanks to the Israeli regime's outrageous behavior, that this is increasing, in pace at this moment.
Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
It's an honor, Nima. Thank you for having me.